seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me away to go. Leave me, run like you never did. No, believe me, run like you never run before.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby Podcast, brought to you by the Scottish Rugby Blog. I am Cammy Black. Joining me this evening, we have John Anderson. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Cammy. How are you?
And Iain Hay. Good evening, Iain.
Hello.
We are broadcasting live currently on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, as well as to our super secret social media group that you can join if you want to, if you sign up for our Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Scottish Rugby Podcast, you can sign up for exclusive content and ad-free versions of the audio podcast for as little as £3 a month. If you want to, you can pay a little bit more. You can pay £5 a month, and we'll read your name out as a way of saying thank you. You can also get audio versions of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Acast, Spotify, and anywhere else that you can download podcasts. Don't forget, you visit the blog, www.scottishrugbyblog.co.uk, as well for all the latest news. We are also brought to you in association with Manscaped. I'm going to make my little thing come up now. I've got a special little thing that comes up. This is just for people on the video podcast. I had this all lined up before. Where is it?
This is dangerous. I've got a little thing coming up whilst you're talking about Manscaped.
Manscaped, and there you go. It's a little animation. See, Jim Hamilton's not got that on his Manscaped thing, but he actually has. But you have to watch it through the entire of his podcast, so I'm going to turn that off now. It says Manscaped got bush, and then the little, for audio listeners, it says Manscaped got bush, and then a little animation of a razor takes it away. So yes, we are sponsored by Manscaped. If you go to manscaped.com/Scottish Rugby or manscaped.com and enter the code SRP at the checkout, then you can get 20% off plus free shipping on a range of gentlemen's grooming products, such as they do aftershave, they do ball deodorant, they do ball toner.
Just got enough ice in your cup there, John?
I do, yeah, I do.
That's not, I should say that John has not got the ice. John pulled that ice from down below. Have you been manscaping, John? Is that to soothe?
No, do you know what? I didn't need to pull ice from down below because it was so soothing using the ball toner.
That's it. I should say for health purposes, please don't drink the ball toner.
Well, that was the only thing we didn't do with it, to be fair, wasn't it? Maybe that'll make band practice interesting next time.
So yeah, like I said, lockdown's over. People are putting themselves back into circulation, so to speak. Maybe you want to, make yourself feel a little bit better. Summer's coming as well. The weather's heating up. You might want to cool yourself down there. If you try other brands, or you've always been curious to try a little electric razor down there instead of maybe a Bic, give it a go. 20% off plus free shipping. John's looking at me shaking his head. I don't know, John. I've never done. This is not the sort of thing I go in for.
Do not go near your nuts.
I know enough of our listeners do go in for this thing, given the the fact that we continue to be sponsored by Manscaped. So
Yeah, most of our listeners will be well aware that myself and Ian have dabbled in this area. And I can safely say, do not ever go near your knackers with a bic.
Yeah,
Especially, like, it doesn't matter how many blades it's got on it, it's not going to work, right? It's going to be a bad outcome. You're going to have a bad day. Don't do it.
Oh, Bics were always those dead cheap, nasty ones, which
Aye.
you shouldn't even use anywhere near your face.
Is that what they use? I thought they used that whenever you see them in like films and that in hospitals. They seem to use. There's always just someone wielding a bic. Or is that just for comedy purposes?
They're professionals, though.
Okay.
One of the best shaves.
Are they
I've
trained?
ever
Is that something you
had.
get taught in medical school? Day
I
one.
believe so.
It
I
is
think
like
they do
shave man's
actually do
balls.
that, yeah. Yep.
Go on then, John.
I got a really good shave in the hospital from a nurse wielding a bic. But
You're only in for an ingrown toenail.
Shh, we're not allowed to mention that.
Anyway, yes. So that's who we're sponsored by. Most people, including my mother, who confessed this week, she skips that part of the podcast. But obviously, if you do want to visit there and check them out, then that will help us and the podcast. We can just launch into it. I kind of contacted Iain and John and said, I'm not really sure. This is on Monday. I said, I don't know what we're going to talk about this week. We've only really got the Scotland, Italy women's game to talk about, but then all the news happened. So we'll start with Scotland women versus Italy. John and Iain, it's an incredibly disappointing result and performance from Scotland women. I think there was an opportunity. I know they haven't had the best of results against Italy in the past, but in terms of like parity, in terms of resource and funding and skills, it maybe felt, Iain, a bit more like it was a level playing field than England going into it anyway.
Yeah, given the leaps and bounds that Scotland seemed to have made when Philip Doyle was there, and then the draw with France. And although you can never really take this as a sort of as a true measure, the fact that Italy got beat more by England than we did. So he thought, all right, maybe there's a wee sniff of a chance here. But it was not a good performance at all. Brian Easton does not seem to have been too pleased about it. Defensively, not good enough at all.
No. What did he put that down to then?
I missed the professor because I was taking Rona at work. But from I've read Gary Heatley's report. He doesn't seem to know what it was. They stressed the importance of starting well because they'd seen that Italy had started well against England. But then obviously, they conceded 2 tries within 10 minutes. And one of them was off the back of a line out, which had been one of Scotland's main strengths 2 weeks prior. So, it's who knows what the problem was, but it just looked so disorganised. A bit headless chicken at times. You
wonder, John, whether or not, obviously they lost Rachel Markham to injury, and you do wonder, it's such a kind of random collection of players from different backgrounds, the Scotland squad at the minute, where you've got a lot of professional players with a lot of experience, and you wonder whether or not the loss of someone like Rachel Markham, who maybe does a lot more of the talking and the organising, is maybe hit them quite hard.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You would expect better, though. There's enough professional players in there that you would expect they would be able to pick up some of the slack. I know Rachel Malcolm's a huge part of that squad, and as you say, is heavily involved in the organisation. Really a talismanic. Let's go with it. Figure. Yeah, thanks, Ian, for the thumbs up. But obviously they were missing. There's people missing, and it does feel, it's really frustrating because it feels like a backward step again. Whilst the results haven't been there, the performances have at times been there. But I'm going to finish on a positive here because this is a new thing for me. Be positive, eh? Someone recently said to me that taking a step back is not a bad thing. It's just you're 2 steps forward, 1 step back is just the steps of a tango. So you're just doing a dance. So I think the concerning thing is that there isn't a clear reason why. Sometimes you come away from games where you've maybe expected to be competitive and it just hasn't went your way, and you can pinpoint one or two areas that definitely, if they'd went right, you would have been there or thereabouts, but there doesn't seem to be anything clearly there, so there's a bit of work needed. And probably the worry is that the girls don't necessarily have as much contact with the coach as maybe their male counterparts do, so fixing that might be a bit more of an issue.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to the structural issues within Scotland women's rugby. It might be a good thing to talk about in conjunction with some other bits of news about finances this week. But you wonder as well, Ian, whether or not there's an element of them being found out. I mean, that's always the difficult, I suppose, when you're a team like Scotland who are kind of developing, that you have like the result against France, and they gave England a couple of scares defensively, that Italy would come into the game maybe better prepared than they would have been in the past, and would know, like I said, obviously read the line out early on. So maybe that's what Scotland are going to have to work on, is the element of surprise now, and the element of, teams are going to come now better prepared because they're going to expect that Scotland will give them a game.
I mean, that is one side to it. I think the biggest issue, though, is staying focused and maintaining the level for 80 minutes. Because we saw that against France, but against Italy, we certainly didn't. Scotland get so close to being level. 2 points. They should have gone in at half-time 2 points down, make an absolute arse of the restart. And then there's a try, and then straight away in the second half, switch off at a ruck. Rigoni bursts through another try. It just seemed to be every time Italy got into the Scotland half, they came away with points. And it's just about maintaining focus throughout the full 80 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that. I suppose we've seen that. That's not necessarily a problem, John, confined to women's rugby or the women's international team. It's that kind of mental doggedness and that mental focus for 80 minutes is something that's kind of haunted Scottish rugby teams at pro level, at club level, for donkey's years.
Yeah, it's funny because I think we're in a situation just now where almost, so it's like we can never have all the good things at once. So the national team seem to have got more of a handle on it, whilst we're probably a couple of not silly mistakes, but a couple of rash decisions away from, we've talked about it, a Grand Slam potentially. And on the other hand, the pro teams, Glasgow and Edinburgh, are almost doing a show and tell of how not to do mental discipline. So yeah, the women's game probably feels a lot like what Scotland's national team and pro teams have been like in the past. You do wonder if there's maybe maybe an argument to be made for investing, yet again, that argument of investing maybe in some mental coaching that would be a shared resource across all the national teams and maybe even the pro teams. But I would be kind of reticent to do that because obviously Richard Cockrell would steal the person. So, that would probably result in nobody else getting access to them.
What are you saying? Because of the deep psychological damage that Richard Cockrell causes to all these players?
I'm just suggesting that Cockrell quite often sees something he likes and whinges and moans enough till his uppers give him what he wants.
Well, moving on from the I'll come back to I'll spend the rest of the podcast now thinking of an anti-Glasgow dig just to rebalance the force, John. But it is structurally that there have been those problems in Scottish rugby across the game, Ian, for a long time now. And like John was saying, it is an area that needs investment. And there almost seems to be a reluctance to invest in it. I mean, Gregor Townsend's had to go out and get his own guy in to act as a consultant, and Damien Hughes, but we don't necessarily seem to have anybody doing that in-house.
Yeah, they'd probably need a psychologist themselves after dealing with their players. Yeah, it was something we seem to be miles behind. Of course, Jason O'Halloran quite famously said, we seem to be 20 years behind. Another thing, like John was saying, could we maybe just loan out Steve Tandy? Being an international defence coach can't take up all your time, can it? You could maybe just as a sort of ad hoc, sort of pro bono. That's the right term. Yeah, but just keep them at hand.
It does seem like we should be using our resources a bit more effectively, actually. And
but I think one of the main things as well, like there's a number of the players in the Scotland squad are unattached. They don't have clubs at the moment. So, bearing in mind the fact that they've obviously had very little training time just with Scotland, they've had very little training time, or we don't know if they've had any training time with a club even to try and stay fresh. So an element of ring rust, but we have to admit we kind of got blown away there.
Yeah, I mean Wales is another opportunity this weekend. That's going to be the game's going to be live on BBC Scotland, BBC Two Scotland, I think, on Saturday. That I saw a couple of people on Twitter suggest that that's due to pressure from everybody saying why haven't the women's games been on telly? But actually, that's always been the plan from the very off.
Scheduled right from the off. Yeah,
the last game will always be on telly.
Yeah.
Wales have had a pretty poor tournament as well. John, I get it's probably, you want to say a must-win game for Scotland, but really they have to put something up against Wales.
Do you know what? I think we're beyond the point of a must-win game. I think we've got to really just put in a performance and see what happens. I think it's acceptable to say, most of the women have not had they've not played in over a year, coming into that first fixture. It takes time to rebuild after that, and they've been heavily hit by the COVID situation. So I think there has to be a degree of pragmatism that, like, results were never just going to. It took us a long time to be building to being competitive. So results were never just going to happen overnight, having had that massive setback that we couldn't necessarily mitigate as well as maybe some of the other big countries could.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's, I don't know if this is a good chance to talk about finances now, because obviously there are structural issues within the women's game within Scotland. I mean, even within the world, and that's kind of, there's a couple of big news items come out this week, one in Scotland and then one's come out today about kind of finances in world rugby. But I mean, there was a suggestion that Scotland were looking at entering a team into the Premier 15s in as a developmental side, I guess, but that money has to come from somewhere, I guess, John, doesn't it? But it would be a worthwhile investment if the SIU are actually committed to growing the women's game.
It would be, yeah. There's more to be. So if we think about easy gains, right? Quite often with investment, you're looking at easy gains. The male game's established, the pro game's established. We have, to varying degrees, funding for those enterprises. We're essentially saying that almost, over 50% of your potential supporter base, if you were to put out a competitive women's team, you encourage so many more people to the game that have not had necessarily the opportunity to be involved in the game. So it's such an the gains from that investment are so much greater than, say you invest, I'm just going to throw a hypothetical figure. Let's say a pro club figure, 5 million, right? Throw 5 million at the women's game. The amount of gains you could get from that 5 million vastly outweigh what, Cockrell or Danny Wilson would get from spending 5 million on their squads at Glasgow or Edinburgh, because, Leinster are still going to win the title. And where 5 million on the national team, we're going to get a few more consultants, a few more coaches who are then going to get, poached for their national teams that they originally are from. You know, somebody comes over to Scotland, does well, they'll go back to South Africa, they'll go back to New Zealand, they'll go back to France. I think we should be really, really investing in the women's game, and with that as well, we should be investing in sevens. And that's a whole different argument, but sevens is still such a good pathway that we've underutilised.
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably come on to that in a minute when we talk about the World Rugby announcement. Well, not the announcement, but the leak that's come out of World Rugby today as well. But I mean, the thing that's come out this week, Ian, is the suggestion that the Scottish government have given the SRU £50 million in grants and loans, and
it's 15 million grants, 5 million loans.
Okay, so 20 million in total.
20 mil total.
So the news yesterday on the offside line was that the clubs, or a lot of clubs, had not had any money filter through to them or any mechanism by which to apply for that money from the SRU. The news today, again on the offside line, seems to be that there is going to be some further announcement about this, and it's going to be spread out over the next 5 years. Yes,
an unprecedented input into the club game spread over the next 5 years. And of course, well, this letter was sent to Dominic Mackay on. Well, will we go into the Freedom of Information Act stuff now? Or
yeah, go on. Let's start with that.
Yeah, let's just. So yes, a Freedom of Information Act request was put in, and it seems that on the 20th of January, a letter was sent to Dominic Mackay, informing him of how much money they were getting, and a lot of it was to assist rugby clubs and organisations across Scotland in dealing with the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Nothing was told to the clubs about this until Thursday the 15th of April. So they've been sitting on this for about 3 months. There's already a massive delay in the 1920 accounts being released, which went against the charter because it's meant to be discussed at the AGM within 4 calendar months. Yeah, 4 calendar months.
Yep.
And it was, I think it ended up about 180 days. So there's a number of worrying things. I'd recommend you going to read the article on the offside line, where you can see all the detail, or otherwise I'd just be sitting here reading stuff for about 10 minutes and you'd be bored to tears if you're not already. But it does seem like another PR disaster emanating from Roseburn Terrace. Yeah.
It's communicated. It's beggars belief that we're here yet again. And, you know, it wouldn't be hard to put something out at the end of December that said we've received this money and we are working on ways to distribute that. I'm slightly skeptical as to why something that's designed to help rugby clubs recover from COVID, the impacts of COVID-19, needs to be spread out over 5 years. Rather than because in 5 years, unless we're all still like, you know, socially distancing, there's still no club rugby happening in 5 years. I don't understand why we would still be feeling the effects of that at club rugby level in 5 years' time, whereas that money presumably is there to plug the gap in the lack of revenue the club's been able to receive from gate receipts and just, you know, functions being cancelled because a lot of clubhouses get used for weddings and other bits and bobs. But the 5 year thing puzzles me because, I mean, the money's just going to be sat in the SRU's bank.
It's
in the meantime, like there's a hole to plug.
Yes, it's almost like they don't.
The money is just a Father Ted defense, isn't it? So Mark Dodson sat there going, the money was just resting in our accounts.
It was resting in our accounts. Yeah, it does. It seems like a very strange one. Like, let's be honest, if we are having to do a virtual big club dinner in 5 years' time to raise money for clubs, then like something's went hella wrong, really. There's, you know, I think we're almost at the point now where it's, you know, the givens in life are life, birth, death, taxes, and SRU PR disasters, because they seem to misread the optic of things all the time. It can't be that difficult just to do it right. Other companies manage. It's insane.
There was a suggestion, I think, with the Keith Russell thing. I'm going to carefully choose my words here. I think there was a suggestion in some of the interviews Keith Russell did at the time that the SRU have perhaps in the past maybe played fast and loose with some in terms of some grant funding that they've received from the government. And but he said in the letter that they have received from the Scottish government giving them the money, he specifically states it's to be used to prevent against the financial impacts of COVID-19 for men's and women's rugby, club rugby, rather than there to be used to, pay part of someone's wage in the pro team.
Well, I've just come across an interesting paragraph as I was scrolling through the segment that's been put on the offside line. Rugby clubs receiving funding. Obviously, this only pertains to the domestic clubs, the amateur clubs. But if it's this rule for them, why is it a different rule for the pro teams? When I read this, you'll understand what I mean. Rugby clubs receiving funding hereby provide an undertaking to the Scottish Rugby Union that the full grant amount will only be used to support ongoing club rugby-related operations, will not be used to fund any player transfer fees prior to the end of the 2021 season, and will not be withdrawn from clubs by owners or directors. How much have we spent on players since? How much have the pro team spent on?
I was going
new
to just say,
contracts
prior to the end of the 2021 season, that's an interesting point that I hadn't picked up. Could there be an argument that all the new signings, i.e. the players coming in, and you could even argue that contract renewals are not in this tax deductible year, they would be in next year, which would be the 2021-2022 season. So therefore, and they're not breaching their terms, they're actually they're maybe not acting morally, but
whether or not there's been a delay in transfers to April on. I mean, there was a delay in Glasgow announcing a load of transfers. It was difficult to get them over the line in inverted commas.
Yeah, but I mean, the money's sitting there, and there's lots of players coming in next season, and you could argue that, like guys like Hamish Watson, guys like Scott Cummings having new contracts, that's a new contract that goes into next year's money, not this year's. So that money could well be just sitting there ready to be used if it happens to exist. But it's all dodgy, really, isn't it? Let's just call it what it is. It's dodgy.
Yeah.
Well, it's either negligent, ignorant, or corrupt. And none of those are good things.
Nope, none of those, Ian. It is completely and utterly accidental negligence.
And if you're acting in an open, honest, and transparent way, then we would have known about this well. And I mean, we knew that the money that they'd been given the money. I think, but I think it just kind of the clubs got fed up of waiting and said, well, where is it? Do you know what I mean? We know the money's been given, and then that's when this letter's come out specifically stating what the money's to be used for. And the club's quite rightly saying, well, why haven't we had it yet? They're all struggling onwards. Some of them struggling to pay the bills, keep the club light, the lights on in the clubhouse. So,
sorry, there's by the 24th of February, Dodson was telling journalists that the grant money had been received in full and that we have had a material grant from government that has allowed us to repair our balance sheet to a certain extent, and that has been enormously helpful. So that does sound like, they've been absorbing some, because any of the potential transfer stuff that could be coming from loans. Okay,
yeah,
the 5 million loan. Then how are they paying off? I mean, obviously they've got this massive shortfall as a 5 million shortfall in ticket revenue alone from 1920 year to 1819. But then surely then they're absorbing some of the grant money into running costs.
I think what they can do, what they can argue, and this is where I think the clubs would get quite rightly be very annoyed about it. What the SRU would no doubt argue is to maintain the infrastructure, which includes club development work, and everybody that goes into running the SRU and keeping the SRU running, that in the to the letter of what they're allowed to use it for, they could probably make an argument that they can use it to pay cover wages for club development work, and guys like Ben Antigua who are there as player liaison and stuff like that. They could argue that is there for the betterment of club rugby. It's not necessary. The clubs would likely disagree with that, and they would have good reason to as well. I think the reason the clubs are getting upset is because they are having no say in how the money's being used. So there's been no discussion, and ultimately, they're the club. We've said this a number of times on this podcast. The clubs are the union. The union doesn't exist without the clubs because the clubs make up the union. So there has been no discussion with the clubs to say, look, this money's been given us to fund you, but look over here, we've got this 5 million shortfall that we really need just to kind of pay these guys their wages. They're the club development guys, but we will eventually filter the money down to you through other means. The clubs might have been happy with that and said, okay, that's fine, but we do need something in the end. Some of them are really struggling in the meantime. Some clubs have done a fantastic job of fundraising over COVID-19, have kept themselves afloat. There are other clubs who maybe aren't so lucky for one reason or another to have the same level of support or well-financed supporters that are able to put the same money into the club, who might need that money more urgently. So you can understand why it's not Mark Dodson's money to spend. And so in these crisis times, there should have been an emergency general meeting, I guess, to say this money's come in. We're proposing to spend it in this way. Do you all agree?
It's almost like if you give the clubs a say and told them exactly what was going on and were honest and transparent about things, that you might have got a better outcome. Look at that, eh?
Yeah, it's almost like if you're forced to work with the clubs rather than dismiss them and try out a hand and alienate them to the point where they're the verge of revolting. Yet again.
Yep. Oh, not even for the first time this year. I mean, how many times are we going to go down this route of dodgy dealings? Back to the Keith Russell affair. There's stuff we don't know about that what happened, but the absolute facts were that the SRU played hard and loose with, policy, basically, or didn't have any policy.
With the law, mainly.
With the law, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just guidelines, really, isn't it?
So essentially, there was a remote meeting of the SRU Council, which is the club's, all the representatives for the clubs turn up. It was arranged last Tuesday, which is the 13th of April, so that Mark Dodson could give a presentation on the matter. Ian Barr, who's the president of the SRU, asked that everyone should have sight of the relevant paperwork related to the grant before the meeting, but it appears this information was not forthcoming, and the meeting was cancelled at late notice. There's now going to be a new meeting tomorrow that has been set, so no doubt we'll get more information after that. But it's just, I think at the minute, it has always been the case that somebody really needs to come in and start being much more transparent at the top. I think Ian Barr, the USRU president, seems to be trying to steer it in that direction, but we wish him the best of luck with that.
An innocent man hath nothing to hide.
I know. It's that thing. I just, you would think that starting an open dialogue with the clubs about the realities of keeping the SRU afloat and the fact that International Rugby makes all the money and
you don't find most of the clubs would have been fine with that. Like if you went to them and said, right, we've got this 15 million, right, and it's for you guys, and you'll get it at some point. But ultimately, we've got a massive shortfall to plug this year. We're going to take a big chunk and we're going to do that with it. And then we're going to release money to you over a 5-year window. It's going to give you, you are not going to get an immediate payout, but you're going to get it over a 5-year window. It's in writing. It's agreed. Everybody would have went, do you know what? Fine.
Or even we're going to hold on to it until Peter Vardy gives us a big load of money. Do you know what I mean? That's essentially that's the kind of stuff that's probably happened. But without saying we've got money coming in down the line, but for the minute we just need to hold on to this for a few months just to stay afloat. But we have got revenue streams that are coming back online, and at that point, God knows we need Martin Compston and the AC12 to come in and sort out the SRU.
You're not wrong. That's the next.
They have Orifice and
season.
Price Waterhouse Cooper.
Yeah, we're going to do a Scottish rugby special of Line of Duty.
Just be
White line
me,
of duty.
me,
Try
Iain and
line
John.
of duty.
Oh, very good. Try line of duty. There's the title for this week's podcast.
Uh,
Well, it's be me, you, and John kind of running and sliding across car bonnets in the Murrayfield car park and storming the offices.
I kind of want to do that now.
Everybody freeze! Stop your admin.
We need some good copper patter.
Put down the Excel spreadsheet.
And all the acronyms. If you want to do it proper AC12 style, all the acronyms.
Yeah, you can't speak in whole words. You just need to absolutely acronym everything.
There's criminals out there. Who's all those extra syllables is taking up time?
Exactly. It's effective and efficient.
Very good. Okay, the other bit of news that's come out today, we managed 24 hours, I reckon, in rugby. Well, less than that in Scottish rugby, while, football was a complete joke. And then, yeah, so like you said, Iain, on Twitter, the SRU just got fed up with not being in the headlines. The big news today is that World Rugby are holding talks with banks about a new investment and essentially they've gone to Barclays, Jefferies and Rothschilds and pitched for a role as advisor to World Rugby. The idea is to sell off the right part of the commercial rights attached to the Rugby World Cup, as well as International Sevens Rugby. The sale, one source said, the sale of the equity stake in a new commercial entity, which has held the commercial rights to men's and women's Rugby World Cups, was unlikely to be the governing body's preferred choice. But the idea is expected to draw significant interest from buyout firms, particularly those with an existing interest in the sport. So, World Rugby is selling part of itself off to try and get more funding, more money.
Pretty much.
I get the need to grow the sport, but there has to come a time, I think, for rugby where it has to try and live within its means.
Yeah, we can't. There's almost this growing desire to be like football. Like, we have to try and create all these competitions and do everything that football does, and we have to have massive transfer fees and massive wages and huge TV deals, and it's all ridiculous. Like, football is a house of cards waiting to collapse, as has been shown in the last 2 days. It is one bad decision by an owner away from absolutely imploding, and rugby doesn't want to go down that route because we have some fairly sketchy owners in rugby. Over, like, particularly in the club game, there's some interesting people out there. Let's not give them the opportunity to destroy the game, please. Yeah,
and it does seem daft. I mean, I think at the point at which I think England, the RFU anyway, I think are still in financial trouble because of the money it cost them to host the 2015 Rugby World Cup, Ian, which seems utterly mad that something that should be a revenue generating enterprise kind of almost sends one of the biggest unions in the world bankrupt.
Yeah, well, it's the same with the Brazilian World Cup, because in that instance, FIFA filtered off most of their money. But I mean, I think for me, this kind of signals the death knell of any chance of a World Cup being played in a smaller country. It'll always be about the one who can provide the best financial package, like as it was with France winning the 2023 deal. Yep. We won't go over the whole we should have voted for Ireland debacle again, because we shouldn't have. But it was between France and South Africa, really, and they went chasing the money. And to me, this says that, again, they'll try and do that. And I think this is the final roll of the dice to try and break into the American market, I reckon.
I think the problem, I don't understand why the continued insistence on trying to kind of force it with 15s, though, because 15s rugby to me is too close to the NFL. I know they're not the same sport, but in terms of what you're asking people to do in terms of investing time and the stopping and the starting of it and the intricacies of the play, you're essentially asking people to kind of switch from what is an established sport in the US, a long established sport in the US, to something that's not that much different realistically. Whereas the thing that they've tried, but I don't think it failed massively for other reasons. But sevens to me is the game that's the event, right? That's the one that it's more exciting to watch. It's an easier sell. Especially from a stadium point of view, it's a day out because you get to watch games back to back. It's not as hard to understand. There must be a bigger global market for sevens than there is for 15s.
We've said this so many times on here that sevens is right. So are we rugby purists? Will we dub ourselves rugby purists possibly?
I want more rugby 10s. That's what I want.
Rugby 10s, yeah, rugby X. Sevens is very entertaining, and it's a cracking day out, and it's a much more Americanized. It's funny that it was made in the borders of Scotland, but it's actually ripe to be an American style sport.
Golf, mate. Don't forget golf.
But I mean, Americans they do golf differently, don't they? But no, I think sevens absolutely is the sport. And see if you could really market sevens properly. There's your revenue. There, that travels the sport. You've got Hong Kong, Japan, America. There's your key markets. Yeah, Japan have got a heavy interest in 15s, but that's because every company in all of Japan wants to have a team filled with former All Blacks, which is a bit strange. So no, sevens is the way to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's the way you get much more. You get your Twitter and YouTube social media friendly quick clips more easily. You can have greater parity between the men and the women's game because you can play the games alternate games and 2 tournaments concurrently across the same weekend.
Is there
you can dip in and out.
You could even play games rather than saying we have a gender segregated games of rugby. Could you even play sevens as a gender, both men and women playing in the same game? There's a speculatory comment for you.
I mean, it's a safer form of the game, certainly. That's the other.
It's more about speed. It's more about speed. You don't necessarily see the absolutely ridiculous smashing hits that you see in 15s. So it is a safer form of the game.
Yeah, and it's not, and that's the difficulty that rugby 15s has at the minute to sell itself globally is that you've got all these stories about head concussions and massive collisions and these huge guys playing the sport. So if you're going to get, for example, like someone like my wife, say like what who reads, that's what she reads in the Guardian, is it's all about concussions and stuff, quite rightly. And there's a lot of people you speak to, I support rugby, or what about all the head knocks? It's not looking good. And we've seen what happened to the popularity of boxing. The wider popularity of boxing over the last decade or so has absolutely plummeted because everyone suddenly realised what a brutal sport it is. Whereas with sevens, it's not. It's not the same, Ian. I don't think, and it'd be much easier to sell to people.
Well, plus you've also got the added bonus of Olympic exposure there.
Mm-hmm.
But now that you've mentioned all that concussion thing, now I'm thinking this is why they're doing this. They're trying to maximise as much revenue as possible for when the lawsuits come in.
Yep.
100%. No, it is a much easier form of the game to understand, and it's it's not going to set as much as we might enjoy a wee bit of a kicking game, a tactical kicking game. Some people will refer to it as kick tennis or whatever, and fans even started booing at the France-England Autumn Nations Cup game.
They did not. That's hearsay, Ian. They did not. Fans don't boo at games.
Well, I forgot there were fans at that game. I was just about to say, was it not the sound guy having a bit of fun? I actually forgot there were some fans at that game, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a few, yeah.
That's mad, isn't it? We had fans at games in the autumn.
Yeah, and then look what happened there, eh?
I know, that went well.
Where were we? I just is sevens the way forward? Is that where we're going to grow the game?
I think that's what we say. I think that they're missing World Rugby are missing the trick in not saying this is the product that we could take out from rugby and say to the world, look, this is the main product we're going to put forward. That you carry on with the Six Nations and all of that, but the one you push into your new markets and elsewhere is sevens, and you don't put it behind a paywall because that's the only way you can see it at the minute. It was on Sky. I think it used to be on Sky. I think the tour
was
wasn't
on
it?
Sky Sports. Yeah.
So nobody's watching that unless you've got a Sky Sports subscription.
The only sevens you watch, like in normal peacetime, the only sevens you watch was the Melrose Sevens.
Yeah.
And that's a cracking afternoon on the BBC.
And that used to get decent. That used to get decent coverage as well, and decent viewing figures as well.
If you think of some of the players you've seen like playing at Melrose on the BBC, it's a great introductory for basically cracking players play sevens.
The new kind of idea for this Melrose Sevens is quite an interesting one because they're going to have two tournaments running. So there's the traditional Melrose Sevens where you get the invitational for your Edinburgh clubs and your Borders clubs to come along and play like they always have, but they're going to kind of create this almost kind of semi-pro level now where you're going to have. Before, when they'd invite Saracens up, Ali Price won. Did you know Ali Price won the Melrose Sevens with Saracens?
With Sarries, he did.
Yeah. There's a wee picture of him. Bless him. He's in the same team as Duncan Taylor was in that team as well, I think.
Yeah. I've got a fleeting memory of, right, what was the Edinburgh scrum half, the really, really, really annoying one with the blonde, stupid hair from a couple of seasons ago? Exactly the one I'm meaning.
Fowles,
Nathan Fowles. I think he won the sevens.
Yeah. There's some big names who've won the sevens. So I think the idea is they're going to have the invitational tournament is going to be more global now, and they're going to try and bring in, get like Glasgow Warriors to send sevens down, but play against kind of say a team from Fiji. And
I mean, when you've won it twice in a row, it's hard. I suppose we've got to make it competitive,
Yeah. But that's the fun of the, some of the Melrose Sevens where you've got guys like Nico Matawala playing against, Watsonians. It's good fun.
Did you see Carlin Isles at that when he?
That was amazing.
Yeah.
He was a warrior at the time.
It's like, oh no, there's too much room for him. He's just going to. I mean, he tried to run down the left wing, found that all avenues were shut down, so he just ran. It was like a computer game. He just ran across to the right wing. Nobody could catch him. Off.
Yeah, you and me's idea of too much room for him was very much different to what his view of too much room was.
I reckon that's the only reason Gregor Townsend signed Carlin Isles was just so Glasgow Warriors could win the Melrose Sevens.
100%.
So
2 years in a row, yeah.
It's the most Boris thing ever. I'm determined. How can I win the Melrose Sevens? How can I troll Melrose whilst managing Glasgow Warriors?
Was Carlin Isles and Nico in the same team?
I think they were different years, unless they did it twice.
It's the sort of thing Nico would do twice just for a laugh. For a day out.
But that's the answer. We've solved World Rugby's problem. If anyone's watching from World Rugby, just invest more in sevens. Push sevens.
They should invite that Fiji Drua. Have you seen this? The two Pacifica
teams,
franchises that are trying to get into
Super Rugby because the South Africans are off elsewhere.
We'll more on that in a minute.
Segueing slightly in there, Cam.
I know. We'll come on to the Fiji Drua thing, but as John says, while we're talking about South African teams and where they may be up to, I've got a new jingle prepared. Here we go. Yes, the Rainbow Cup. That's what I thought I'd do to cover the Rainbow Cup.
I did have a black wristband on, and then when I came on with Cam, I immediately went, boom, Rainbow wristbands.
So at this stage, and I haven't checked Twitter since we've been on air, the Rainbow Cup is still happening. There was supposedly going to be some sort of announcement today that says that it's not going ahead. But as of time of recording, and I'm just double checking this now, there has been no official announcement as to whether or not this is happening or not. So the Rainbow Cup, for those of you who don't know, it's a competition of the Pro 14 plus teams from South Africa, who are joining the proposed to join the Pro 14 at the end of the season for next season anyway, which would make it the Pro 18. Have I got my numbers right? Pro 16, because they got rid of that's right.
Oh, no,
the two South African and replacing before, haven't they? So Pro 16. So it's kind of like an interim tournament to kind of bridge the gap between the end of the Pro 14 and Summer Rugby, which ended up being the Pro 12 because the two South African teams left early anyway. So
Yes.
here we are. It's all a mess. Anyway, it turns out that the South African teams can go to Ireland and Scotland and even Italy, but the English government will not let them base themselves in Bristol, which is where they want to be based. The rumours come from South Africa as every other government involved was happy for them to travel to play these games, apart from the English government, who obviously doesn't have any skin in the game, who said, no, you can't base yourself in Bristol.
Would they not just base themselves across the border in Wales then?
Where, though, I guess? It's kind of finding facilities in Wales. I mean,
Wales is
Abergavenny RFC shed at the back for the Blues.
Celtic Manor. The big golf
I mean,
course.
you could go for that, or I mean, you could just make it a proper jolly and just like tour about Wales, just like going to random rugby clubs and using their facilities. Turning up and be like, yeah, so this is the best. here's Khaleesi rocking up for training at some poor wee club in Aberystwyth.
At this stage, there are fixtures scheduled to go ahead at the weekend with all the South African teams playing each other. I think some of the concern is about even internal travel within South Africa might be difficult at this stage as well. But the Pro 12 teams, the Italian, the Welsh, the Irish, and the Scottish teams are playing each other. So Glasgow playing Benetton, Edinburgh are playing, either of you know?
Zebra.
So Scottish teams playing the Italian teams this weekend, and then it's two back-to-back 1872s after that, isn't it?
Yes.
Again, my prediction at the start of the season that we would play 15 1872 games. It would be like an American franchise, like the World Series is the best of 7. We're going to do best of 15.
Yeah.
Sounds like another competition that somebody was suggesting just the other day there. That's been in the news.
We're only going to play one team. That's all we want to do.
Yeah. So at this stage, we don't know what this cup is going to end up being.
A farce.
It's not a farce. The Farce Cup. It's going to be, let's say, it's just going to be a series of friendlies until Leinster are given a trophy.
Yes, yeah, basically, yeah. Oh, Leinster have already won it, haven't they? So,
yeah, probably.
Although they haven't won the Rainbow Cup yet, so
it causes some it causes some difficulties for the South African teams who are desperate to get fixtures in under their belts before the Lions tour, because otherwise the Springboks are going to be severely lacking match practice.
Because that's going ahead also.
that needs to get to the squad announcement so that everybody who listens to this podcast, including me, can claim our money when Chris Harris is named in the squad.
Absolutely, yeah.
Don't care what happens after the squad announcement, so long as I want my money.
I had a slightly segued thought just when we mentioned. Are we doing Lions chat just as an aside? Just there's no Lions chat tonight, is there? We're not doing a jingle.
We've got some. I've got some Lions chat later on in Hands in the Ruck, so we can. Do you want me to? I mean, if you want Lions chat, I can do the jingle if you want, John.
Oh, that's what I want. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
okay.
That's what I'm going for.
It's the legally mandated Lions chat. The legally mandated Lions chat. We've heard so much about it that it makes us sick, but we've still got to chat about who Gatlin's gonna pick.
Go on then, John. It's legally mandated Lions chat.
So I was thinking about the fact that Hamish Watson is now the ultimate like basically the ultimate warrior of the Lions in 2021. He's going to be a Lion in everyone's book. And then I was thinking about how ridiculous is it that he signed a undisclosed length of contract with Edinburgh yet again, and I'm 4 or 5 years, ridiculous. So what we're thinking is it 5 years?
That is it's 5.
Utterly ridiculous.
No, that was the Jamie Ritchie contract.
Jamie Ritchie's, yeah.
Jamie Ritchie's he's basically a lifer now. He's like
Watson's 3, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I'm wondering. I think maybe Edinburgh, SRU, and Mr. Watson have played a smart game here. Mr. Watson's going to go on a Lions tour, and then his value will go up, and then he might get poached by a club down south. And with a couple of years on a contract, quid's in. I think it's a new tactic from our overlords. Yeah. I think they might actually be forward planning here. Who would have thought it?
There was a suggestion, wasn't there? I think that I think it was Danny Wilson was saying that that's part of the reason why they've decided not to announce contract lengths at the SRU. One is because sometimes it's players' choice that they don't want the stress of kind of having speculation around when the contract's going to end. But also the other side of it is that it kind of helps the SRU from a transfer point of view because, one, they don't have clubs sniffing around, and when clubs do come sniffing around, they could basically demand whatever they want. So, like, if you know that there's only 2 years left on Hamish Watson's contract, for example, after Lions 2, and you're saying, right, well, we'll pay out the 2 years left on his contract, but if it's an undisclosed time period, the SRU can presumably within reason name the price, essentially. So, well, we want compensation for the rest of his contract plus
X. So what you're saying is our patented working out the SRU's nonsense calculator is
we diddle them out of millions. I mean, we're the reason they've had to apply for a loan and a grant.
What have we done?
I know. Yeah, English Premiership now owes us millions of bucks.
I did enjoy. Did you see that? Speaking of Lions, did you see the RFU review of their poor Six Nations campaign? One of which was they needed to do more work in the breakdown, including building lower body strength. And I was like, essentially what you're saying is Tom Curry's crap and Hamish Watson's better. That's the review. Tom Curry is a bit crap.
He is a bit though, isn't he?
He is a bit crap. Yeah,
like if you were given like, so say you went to a restaurant and like a Tom Curry was like presented to you, or a Hamish Watson, you'd be like, Hamish Watson all day, mate.
Tom Curry is the chicken tikka masala of the curry world. It's what people who don't really understand curry order.
Yeah, it's basically 2 chilies and you order an extra naan bread as well, just
and you're really, really disappointed that you didn't just order all the pakora.
I filled up on naan bread. I don't want this Tom Curry.
So is there a section then once Watson gets announced as a Lion? Is there a section on what Curry's the various Scots players who get picked are?
I think there's something in that, yeah.
Because I mean, Chris Harris immediately is a Celanese korma, like safe, solid, not very exciting, but does a job.
You know that Planet Rugby thing, like the who's hot and who's ice.
Who's hot and who's not.
We should do it on Curry scale. We'll just adapt that for our Lions. We'll adapt it to Curry scale for no other reason.
Who's going to the loo?
We'll call it to the Tom Curry scale.
Absolutely.
You've got Tom Curry very mild at the bottom, right up to a searing hot curry. The thing with Chris, I'm thinking Chris Harris is more of the kind of curry that sneaks up on you the next day. You're watching it and you're thinking this. You're watching and thinking, well, it's all very good and it's a lovely curry. But then the next day, you watch the highlight reel back and you're going, whoa, that's hot.
he's a Madras.
That's it.
I mean, I'm
Chris
getting
Madras
from
Harris.
Chris Madras Harris. I'm getting from you get those, like, so when you go to the supermarket and you get those like they're not even labelled what type of curry they are. It's just like chicken curry. That's what Tom Curry basically is. He is an undisclosed curry.
Yes.
He's a magnificent physical specimen, as Stephen Jones said.
Oh, Stephen Jones.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
guy he's a
Shall we
waste
go,
of a
like-
Vindaloo.
Hold that thought. Yeah, before we get too ranty about things not related to Scottish rugby, it is time for Hands in the Ruck. We have got something on this. It kind of continues a theme, so to speak. This was on the our super secret social media page. And let me scroll down and find out who it was. It was, who said this? Somebody posted about Stuart Barnes. Dougal Mack. So Stuart Barnes being allowed near punditry in any way, shape, or form. The man is a buffoon and crassly underperformed on his own British Alliance appearances. At least he played a decent level, though. Stephen Jones, what even is he? And then he said some unfortunate, but unfortunate but very agreeable words about Stephen Jones. This, for those that may not know, Stuart Barnes did an article for the Times. He pooped himself in public for attention, really. Did an article in the Times where he said, well, the headline was Stuart Hogg is a defensive liability, but the article seemed to say, I have concerns about Stuart Hogg's defence, but then concluded by saying Stuart Hogg is very good at defence. So I don't really understand what the point was, other than it was clickbait.
That is it in a nutshell. It is utter clickbait nonsense.
He's no less a flawed fullback defensively than any of the other candidates that you would put forward at fullback for the Lions.
There's like running jokes about fullbacks not being able to defend. It's a thing. Fullbacks they're not your like blindside flanker. They're not smashing people back in the tackle. A fullback that can defend is a fullback that's not attacking, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's one reply that agreed with him, and I mean, this is the mentality of. Well, I assume this gentleman's English. He might be flashy and have moments of brilliance, but not reliable enough, and doesn't have that solid as a rock imposing vibe. Because that's what everyone thinks about fullbacks, isn't it?
Solid as a rock imposing vibes.
Definitely pick Mike Brown then for fullback.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I would love a bit of underpaced Mike Brown. Sod's a rock. Did you see Hogs try at the weekend? Like I actually,
unbelievable.
I flicked over. So I got in the house and I put on the television and I was like, oh, there's some rugby on. Fantastic. Just as Hogg put that spiral kick in. And I was like, okay, we're doing this. Okay, we're doing this. Right. There's why Hogg's 15. Everybody else can go and ram it.
I have a theory about that kick. Because when you watch it back,
he aims for the injured guy.
Well, I think he does the spiral kick. I think he's hoping it goes to touch. And as soon as it leaves his boot, he thinks, oh, that's not going to touch. And so, like, just leathers after it and catches it and then scores a try.
You see Johnny Gray pointing at him, sort of like, yeah, there's no one back there, by the way. Go. He's a
yeah.
Yeah, because the defensive line, because there's the injury in the middle of the park, it's like clearly, like, he just punts it straight over it. And it's like, oh, that's on.
I don't know where this thing about Stuart Hogg not being good in the air comes from as well, because it's not something we see him do a lot for. We don't see him do it a lot for Scotland, but I don't think he's asked. He's not put in the. If you look at them positionally, what he's given to do is he stands next to the receiver in the air. They pass to him, and then he leathers it up the field. He's not put in positions to catch and compete for the ball.
It's all tap from, as Ian rightly says, it's all tap from his early days where he was a turnstile in defence and couldn't catch a ball in the air, but he could run like nobody's business and can kick like an absolute cannon.
So, right, I'm not going to deny that Williams is better in the air than him, and Keenan arguably is as well. But Stuart Barnes is suggesting these two ahead of him. Hugo Keenan's got 11 caps for Ireland. So if he thinks that South Africa are going to put bomb after bomb up on Stuart Hogg to test him out, you don't think they're going to do that to a guy who's only played 11 international matches? My main gripe with this whole thing is you don't get these hatchet jobs highlighting minor flaws that players make. He goes on about how he got stepped by Paulo Odogwu. He's like, but imagine if Paulo Odogwu can do that, what will Cheslin Colby do to him? Cheslin Colby does that to everyone. He done it to Joe Marler and Owen Farrell in the World Cup final, and you still want to take Owen Farrell, don't you? So shut your
Martin Bell says, one of the great things about the expansion in online rugby punditry in recent years is you don't have to trouble yourself with Jones and Barnes' output. They're the Wales online of the broadsheet world and should be treated with the indifference they deserve. Well said.
Absolutely.
I think the problem is that I was saying in response to this on Twitter this weekend that there's this almost like a smear campaign going on, and with certain sections, particularly the English press. What is the English press really? That I get particularly with whenever a Scottish player suggests that they kind of seek to undermine them. But I don't really get to what end that is, other than getting rage clicks from north of the border, because it's not like Warren Gatland's going to pick up sit in the coaches meeting with Gregor Townsend, and Gregor Townsend's going, well, why are we not taking Hamish Watson and Stuart Hogg? And Warren Gatland's, well, did you not see what Stuart Barnes and Stephen Jones said? No, Gregor, oh, fair enough. No, I've read that. You're right enough. They say he's crap. That's me. I'm not going to fight the corner anymore.
I think it would appeal to a certain section of their base. However, you think though, if they really wanted to wind them up, they should praise the Scottish people.
They'd get more clicks. They'd definitely get more clicks.
Get more comments. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe they are under a deluded view that their view is influential. Like, I think so. Having met Stuart Barnes, the guy is, and I might know, like, there's a comment on the YouTube page saying Barnes is a complete and utter hammer. Let's say hammer, right? I don't know, but having met Barnes, he is an absolute hammer. He's not very clever, and I think he does believe that he has.
Is this where's Dougie Donnelly? When did you meet Stuart Barnes, John?
I met Stuart Barnes at Murrayfield one fateful day. So Stuart Barnes was there, and Stuart Barnes was struggling to change the TV channel. It was absolutely mint. And I helped him set up the TV channel so he could watch the England game. it was hilarious. It was
Stuart Barnes cannot work a remote control. You heard it here
absolutely
first.
Cannot. So there's just down from the press box at Murrayfield.
Right, that's why all of his opinions are outdated, because he's not been able to work the telly for years.
Basically, he's still working on repeats, mate. He's on Call of Duty Liner Duty season 1. But no, Stuart Barnes is an idiot. Absolutely confirmed idiot. He can't work a TV. So, but I think he does believe he's got some sort of influence on the Lions. Like, he seems to think that his opinion actually matters, and he puts it out there like, I'm going to say what I think because then the Lions selectors will take that into account. They absolutely won't. Some of the other.
I saw someone this weekend saying, there's articles this weekend saying who's improved the Lion chances based on this weekend's Premiership performances, and Danny Kerr was put up. It's like, there's a point. It's
like improving your chances from absolutely hee-haw to completely and utterly not a chance.
There seems to be quite a push for Joe Marler coming as well. It's getting like, there's been obviously like former teammates like Chris Robshaw that have been putting him in. One of his teammates, is it Vincent Koch that's playing with him just now?
Yeah.
That was in like Rugby Pass or something. There's.
It's just a constant need to fill column inches with utter rubbish about the Lions, as though it's going to make a halfpenny difference. As though because former ex-pro picked somebody in a Lions 15 sponsored by investment firm you've never heard of is going to influence Warren Gatland's selection for the tour.
But then we have speculated in the past that the number of Welsh players was directly so Mr. Gatland. Obviously, there's financial reward for Lions players. The number of players on tour correlates to a payment to the union. And there was speculation that Gatland had picked a few extra Welsh players to start to fund the Welsh Rugby Union's deficit.
I think the only The only kind of time I think you could say that he was definitely, I think that the Welsh fans would say there's other times he was influenced by the media. He was definitely influenced by the media for the Geography 6 thing with that backlash. I think he said in his autobiography that they weren't expecting that backlash to the Geography 6 issue. That's why nobody got on apart from Finn Russell because of a head knocked to Dan Bigger and Alan Dell because, again, I think that was a concussion as well or a yellow card and he had to come on and prop up the scrum.
Because he's so beautiful as well.
He had the best success rate of any prop on that tour. One scrum completed 100%.
I mean, can you imagine being that successful and that beautiful? It must be like devastatingly hard.
I mean, he does play for London Irish. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, John.
I know, but that's by choice. He's doing it ironically. He's like the hipster of rugby.
Well, speaking of, that's a bit of news. There's two bits of news we can do for. See, look at this. Here's some Edinburgh stuff to counteract John being rude about them. Mike Valemsa is going to be off to London Irish.
That's a good move for Edinburgh.
I know, Dave Cherry, come on.
Valemsa's been utterly carnage.
They've signed a new lock.
They have.
What's his name? Pierce Phillips. That's his name.
From it seems a bit of a journeyman, to be fair. But Fraser McKenzie's announced his instant retirement, so I assume it's just a kind of depth replacement for him.
To be fair, like an immediate retirement, age 33, is like, I mean, that's a bold statement, but
it's going to be next week. Yeah. I mean, they've been playing Magnus Bradbury at lock the last couple of games, so obviously they're down to the bare bones there.
Magnus Bradbury, who got absolutely overlooked for the France game by Ryan Wilson. God help us all.
John, what's at the hands in your ruck this week?
Do you know, it was so I've been rewatching a lot of old Scottish rugby matches. I've had a wee bit of time in my hands to watch some of the classics, let's say, and with all the stuff coming out about, so it's like, let's say this is tangentially related to Scottish rugby, but I noticed the Owen Farrell coming back for Saracens to lead a victorious Saracens clan to an absolute pumping of Doncaster. Aye, that's right, Doncaster guys. Hey,
they had Mike Cusack playing, I think.
The coup's still going. Yes, that's beautiful.
See, unfortunately, I didn't see the match, but I think I saw that on Twitter somewhere.
He just knew the coup just done all the scrums and loved life. But I was watching that 2019 match back, and the hit on Darcy Graham from Owen Farrell, the one that he doesn't get anything for other than, you know, a sore, let's say shoulder, let's be generous. And it just reminded me of how much of a disgusting little thug Owen Farrell is. And the fact that he is being celebrated by the media for coming back for the cheaters that are Saracens, and they're going to amateur clubs and drubbing them, and this is some sort of indication of his brilliance, is utterly disgusting, and the press that are celebrating it should be utterly ashamed of themselves.
Yeah. Interestingly, Steve Tandy and Gregor Townsend were watching Saracens this weekend.
Duncan Taylor is so gone on the Lions tour. Duncan, I think Duncan Taylor must have Nudisa Tooney, because like there is serious like questions as to why he's been in every squad, despite the fact he is actually like he is more injured than like there's 60-year-old rugby retirees that are less injured than Duncan Taylor, and he gets into Scotland squads.
He just, you know, it's the hair.
It's beautiful hair, isn't it? Yeah. So just on the topic of hair, as part of my addiction to buying rugby tops, I am now the proud owner of a Worcester Warriors top.
I think we might have to stage an intervention at this for you, John.
There's some serious,
Step too far.
serious issues going on here.
Shop till you drop with
Yeah.
John Anderson.
It was available. What can I say?
We've had a Hands in the Ruck on Twitter. Ian McGilp says his Hands in the Ruck is the responses to the RFU's tweet announcing their Inclusivity Commission being exactly what you'd expect, but no less depressing for it. Apparently making rugby open to black and minority ethnic working class people is a far left Marxist insurgency.
Well, I saw that somebody on Facebook on England's official page, they'd said that it was England players taking the knee was why they performed so badly in the Six Nations, and not that just that they were pish and played an incredibly negative style of rugby. I've avoided that, but no, I'm glad to see Ugo Monye taking up a role like that. He's a well-known figure. He's well liked. He seems like the right man for the job there.
I'd like to see the SRU. I don't really see why the SRU couldn't do something similar. I mean, particularly if you look at it. I mean, we've talked about this before on the podcast. The kind of the ethnic makeup of Scotland is different to England in terms of percentages of the population being from different ethnic minority backgrounds, but I think it's still undeniable that the black and Asian and other minority ethnic populations are underrepresented in rugby in Scotland. And if the SRU were being true to the whole threads that bind us thing, then they would want to do something about that. And they've got a plan. They've got their lovely little diversity plan that I think last time I checked hadn't been updated since Q3 of 2012 or something, but it's not. There's no reason they couldn't set up something similar and find out what are participation rates like in rugby. Why aren't black minority ethnic players able to rise to play in the pro game in Scotland? Just because it's more of a pronounced problem in England, I don't know, but it doesn't mean that it can't be addressed in Scotland.
Well, there is also excuse me, mainly the sort of class issue surrounding that. I
mean, God, anybody that goes into, anytime anybody goes near Murrayfield in anything other than red trousers and a flannel shirt, they think there's a Marxist insurgency in Edinburgh.
I'll defend them. It's not as bad as that now, but it used to be pretty bad.
See, does like the diversity remit of Ugo Monye, does that also include try to get more women involved in rugby? Because I'm just thinking there about when you were talking about investing more. The 1920 accounts also showed participation numbers, and Scotland are only picking from 2001 for 1920 annual year, 2,120 adult females were registered with Scottish rugby clubs. So it's not exactly a massive base to pick from.
Is that all?
So that's, and then you've got your handful down south, and that's about it.
So I mean, you're still talking. So male participation rates are what, 30,000 thereabouts?
I think it was 35.
Yeah, thereabouts. So I mean, that just shows the absolute challenge of, and we're still competing on a national stage, and the challenge of putting together a vibrant women's game in Scotland is.
And I think, because you can really, outside of the cities, it's a real challenge because you've got, you have successful teams like Oban Lawn, for example, but to go and play a game, the travel that's then involved because they're going down to Glasgow to play, Glasgow Uni, for example, or something like that. It's not so. Women's rugby outside of the Glasgow and Edinburgh is a real challenge just because of the distances involved to play a game.
Something maybe the universities, to your point there, Cam, the universities could be doing a bit more as well. Like if they're creating women's teams and getting girls interested in rugby at university level, then there's an argument that that's one way to do it. There's also just the simple argument that we've made throughout this podcast that if you throw money at it, clubs will get involved.
And there are clubs doing good. I mean, I know for Berwick, for example, they've started a girls section a couple of seasons ago, and that's going really strong. And there's they've got women training.
Bishopton are absolutely the same. They created their women's section a couple of years ago, and they had their first fixture. I think it was last year, just before everything kind of shut down. So,
there's lots of good work going in there to kind of increase the participation, which is good. But it's kind of what it kind of strikes me that that's all down to the individual endeavours of a few clubs, as opposed to anything kind of coming down from on high to try and foster that.
But see, if you just put it on the bloody BBC and stopped hiding it in the iPlayer, you would increase your participation.
Well, there was Emma Wassell was the Scottish Rugby put out a video of Emma Wassell talking about kind of her moments in rugby. And I mean, I was absolutely gone in the middle of when she talks about her dad. I'm like, honestly, good. Then he watched that without a hanky.
Oh, no.
Christ, that's a hard watch halfway through. But when she was talking about how she got into it, and basically, like, I think one of her friend's older sisters went out, from the club, went to her school and talked to her about it. It's not like the SRU were parachuting somebody in to say, kind of pounding the tarmac, and going in the school saying, come and play rugby. It was someone for the local club went along and say, if you fancy a game, come down. So a lot of the stuff isn't, like you say, John, it's not coming from up on high. It's kind of local clubs doing it.
You notice that as well when you're in and around these clubs. It's individuals. It's always, there's a couple of individuals that are really pushing the agenda. And certainly that's been true. Not certain individuals, but there's been a collective group of people at Bishopton that have kind of pushed for having a women's team, and rightly so. And it shouldn't come down to individuals at clubs to do that. It should be, it should be in the national remit. There should be a one size fits all. We need clubs to have women's teams. It just shouldn't be negotiable.
I think it used to be you get more money, you get more funding for that. You do. I think there is financial incentives for having women's sections at your teams. I think there is money that you get from the SRU and grants and stuff. But it's been a while since I've checked.
Double it,
details.
triple it.
Yeah.
Do whatever needs to be done, because we need to be giving people. Rugby's meant to be accessible. We've said this so many times on the podcast. It's meant to be accessible. It's not bloody accessible. It is a joke with regards to accessibility. Give people the opportunity to play.
Ian, did you have hands in the ruck?
The Barnes thing is one of them. One of them, I think this might also be yours, going on what was said earlier when I mentioned Fiji Drua. So we've got two new Super Rugby franchises, Fiji Drua and Moana Pacifica, being set up. But whereas any other Super Rugby franchise or Super Rugby Aotearoa franchise, you'd only be allowed to have 2 players who aren't eligible for the All Blacks on your roster. With these 2 new franchises, it will be 8 players. So rather than these players just being eligible for Samoa or Tonga or Fiji, they are going to fill them with possible players who are eligible for the All Blacks, which is kind of like what they've been doing all along. It doesn't seem like it's level playing field. They're sort of playing the sort of, oh look, here we are setting up a pathway for the Pacifica teams. Yeah, but you're also doing it slightly underhandedly, or with a loaded dice. Yeah,
it's not there was, I think, this kind of there was leaked recordings of, I think, somebody, the person in charge of the competition, saying that it was untapped potential, and they weren't talking about markets when they're talking about untapped potential. They're obviously talking about players. I think the one thing I was wondering about this is whether or not I know there are ways around this for people and unions, but I think there comes a point at which World Rugby have to ban competitions, putting limits on the number of players that have to be French qualified or English qualified or New Zealand qualified in top flight competitions, like at the professional level. I mean, it might be, I don't know, for whatever reason, might be fine further down, but certainly at that kind of level, it's preventing other countries from their players being able to develop it. It's stifling the market almost as well. That it can then be down to the decision of individual clubs, for example, to whether or not they want to go with that, whether or not they want to kind of fill themselves with foreigners. But I think it's not fair for, like in the English Premiership, the RFU give money to clubs depending on how many players they've got, which is fine. There's a financial incentive there. That's fine. But I think it's different to say, you can only have so many players in your team that are qualified for the All Blacks. So you can only have 8 players who aren't qualified for the All Blacks, which is a completely different thing. I think France have got quotas as well now as well.
It's back to that old argument many moons ago, and you guys are old enough. You guys are both older than me, just to drop that back in there. But, so both remember the European quota that used to exist, and that you could only have 3 foreigners in your team in football.
Yep, I remember Championship Manager 2000.
It was a nightmare, wasn't it?
Absolute nightmare.
Aye, you would play as Man United. You would have Kanchelskis, Cantona, and one t'other, and then you would be trying to sign some decent players from AC Milan, and hard going, mate, hard going. But yeah, but there's still quotas in place in so. For example, in both the Pro, let's call it the Pro X, because we don't know how many teams are in it. There's rules regarding match day squads. You have to have a certain number of call-pack qualified players, so your national kind of EU plus call-pack. It's the same in the Heineken Cup. So we do have these rules in place, and they, I think Ratu Tagivi had talked about how it actually impacted him quite significantly in his first few years at Glasgow, because he just couldn't get in a squad because we didn't have space for him.
Yeah, and it does, and it's stifled. That's where the tier 2 nations and tier 2 players are going to struggle, because they can't break through these quotas. And if you want to give them more opportunity, then you just get rid of them all. You get rid of them altogether, and then it's down to individual unions how they manage that. You could manage it through financial. You could manage it through financial incentives for the clubs. I think it would be one way to do it, but to have kind of strict limits and strict kind of rules saying you must pick. You must only have so many foreign players or non-qualified players in your squad, or a matchday squad, or in your squad overall. Just seems, I think, mad.
There has to be a limit on the financial incentives as well, because even thinking about looking at the Premiership, you've got guys like Cameron Redpath, for example, Gary Graham. There's guys who've almost in some ways not declared for Scotland. Cameron Redpath could have been a Scotland international 2 years ago. But for various reasons, there would have been pressure on him not to do that, because, his club received money for being an English qualified or a potentially English qualified player. And as soon as he declares for Scotland, they lose that funding. So there has to be a limit on how much financial incentive, because then governing bodies have the ability to influence the national game. They have the ability to say, do you know what, I think Cam Redpath shouldn't be Scottish, so I'm going to give his club £1 million for every English qualified player that they can produce. Oh, look, Cam's dual qualified. Oh, but you're getting £1 million for him. So how about you put that into his contract as well, eh?
It just skews the whole kind of recruitment process, doesn't it? Yeah. Because if as an English club you come up and you see 2 promising young Scots players and one's got an English granny, you take him because the RFU will give you a bung essentially.
Or you've got a Scottish boy, but if you get him down to a good university nice and early, or a good school nice and early, and then a good university, and then hope he doesn't go back up to Glasgow and then non-son back down to Gloucester.
Then when you multiply that with you kind of reduce that down to the level of the tier 2 and what was discussed in Oceans Apart, where you've got guys being taken to France and to New Zealand really young and put in schools and exploited so that they can get their residency to then fill those quotas, even if it's not to be an All Black, even if it's just that, we can then get you a promising young player, we can then get you in under our All Black quota because you qualify on residency. We can get you into our French quota because you qualify on residency, because we brought you over when you were 17, 18, and put you up somewhere. But if you didn't have those quotas, then those players might come across a lot later. There wouldn't be the need or the pressure to kind of get them in under residency. But
that's the thing, and ultimately that's all back to residency rules. And almost there's an argument. let's get slightly out there. There's an argument that the 5-year residency rule is just going to exacerbate that, because ultimately you want an international rugby player to be 20, 25, 26 when he makes his debut, maybe slightly younger. You want to get maximum return on your investment. If you're having to do 5 years residency before you get that, you're going to bring them over 15, 16. It starts to get a bit silly, doesn't it? Whereas 3 years, a guy like Johan van der Merwe can come over. He had ambitions of being a Springbok. Didn't quite work out for him. And he came over and he's now playing international rugby. And fair play to him. And yeah, there's an argument that residency is 5 years is way too long.
Yeah, we've been here. We have a whole Patreon special on this.
We sure do. Yes.
So if you want to listen to that, you have to subscribe to our Patreon. We're not going to give away spoilers for that. Any more from either of you? I think we've covered everything this week.
No, I'm good here. I think we've
an hour and 33 minutes later.
Yeah, there we go. We've got to the hour mark, and I thought we're nearly done.
Once we take away the theme music, it's a bang on hour and a half, really, isn't it? So
yeah, exactly. Lovely stuff.
That's what we give.
Thank you very much, guys, for listening this week. We'll be back next week. We'll have a review of Scotland women versus Wales. We'll probably on Monday think that's probably all we've got to discuss, and then the whole of World Rugby will go on fire by the time we come to broadcast, as it always does.
Danny Wilson will hire 7 billion Fijian rugby players for Glasgow Warriors.
The European Champions Rugby Super League will be announced.
Which Leinster will win every year. And on that note, it is goodbye from me and goodbye from Iain and John.
Night, folks.